All right, so it's 9 o'clock. Let's get started. Hello everyone. Welcome to our today's Zoom seminar. It's absolutely my pleasure to welcome our today's speaker, Dr. Emma Eve from Cell. So Emma currently is scientific editor from Cell Press. And just a very brief introduction. So Emma did her undergraduate in Columbia. And then she continued to pursue her PhD training in MIT in Boston. Both undergraduate study and PhD training she received are all in chemical engineering. But then from 2020, during her PhD training, she worked on developing a rapid, more accessible molecular method and device for diagnosing infection disease. And then in 2021, Emma joined Cell Press as a scientific editor. So Emma actually, I have multiple acquaintance with Emma to discuss about science and some of our work. She has been super helpful for, I think, general to all the audience, all the authors. Just a few months back, she gave a seminar at NIH regarding the review and publication process with Cell Journal, which I think was really super helpful for the scientists, particular junior faculty. So after her talk, I decided to invite her to our platform to share her experience and insight with the community. Actually, we really appreciate your joining us today, Emma. And we are very much looking for your talk.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much, Chuan and Shelley, for having me. It's really great to have an opportunity to talk to all of you. Yes, I'm Emma Yee. I've been a scientific editor at Cell for about 4 years, and my job as a scientific editor is to facilitate the publication of scientific research. But I remember from my own time being a researcher that the role of editors and the publication process in general can often seem a bit mysterious and not very easy to navigate. So my goal today is to try to explain how papers go from initial submission to acceptance at Cell, and some of this information can also be generalized to other Cell Press journals as well, and all the considerations that we editors make at every stage of the process. So Chuan mentioned a bit of this, but just very briefly, a bit about me. My training is in chemical engineering, but I worked on a very broad range of research projects over the course of my training. I worked on everything from like cancer drug development to water and sanitation to even jet engine combustion. And during my PhD, I worked on developing diagnostic technologies for infectious diseases like malaria and Zika and tuberculosis. So this pretty varied research background, I think, has helped me adapt quite well to my role at Cell, where I handle papers in a wide range of pretty broad fields like microbiology, biotechnology, and therapeutic development, interfacing a little bit with immunology as well. So I'm an editor at Cell, which is one of many Cell Press journals. So Cell Press has 30 primary research journals like that you might have heard of, like Med and Immunology and Cell Host and Microbe, that cover many different research topics across life science, physical sciences, medicine, applied science. We also have trends journals that publish mainly review articles, and we have several partner journals as well. So today I'm going to discuss how the editorial process works at Cell specifically, because each journal has its own editors and each journal is editorially independent, but many of the insights that I share today are also translatable to any other Cell Press journal. So if you find yourself submitting to, say, like Cell Reports or Immunity, you can probably still use a lot of the things that I talk about today. So a little bit about Cell. We're the flagship journal of Cell Press. We have the highest impact factor and the broadest scope. We cover everything related to anything related to biology, so also biological engineering, medicine. We publish preclinical trials, early stage clinical trials. We also publish computational work as well. we're looking for exciting discoveries that provide an unusually major advance to a broad field or fields and impact a lot of researchers and therefore should be highlighted to an exceptionally large audience. We're interested in both short and long stories. We recently brought back our short article format. And we're interested in, everything from basic biology to clinical and translational studies. So to give you a little bit of a sense for the type of stuff that we publish in the broad scope of our journal, these are some of my favorite papers that we've published in the last year or so. So we just actually put out a paper on woolly mammoth evolution and extinction, which I think was very cool. We published stuff on like neuroimmunology, of course, anything related to immunology. Definitely, we published stuff on weird pathogenesis mechanisms of tuberculosis. We also publish more kind of clinical facing things. So we published a paper on the first woman to be potentially cured of HIV in some early stage clinical trials on liver regeneration, and even some papers on sounds emitted by plants when they're stressed. So the people that publish all of this work and kind of help facilitate the publication of all this work are the editors. So we have 16 editors at Cell. They cover all areas of biology, engineering, and medicine. And our editors work from offices all around the world and interact with the global research community. So we're trained researchers from all areas of experimental biology and engineering. It's required that all editors have at least a PhD. Almost all the editors have also done at least one postdoc, and many editors were actually professors before they made the transition into publishing. So people who have had a good amount of familiarity with the academic process and publishing. So the main job of editors is to bring a research paper through the steps of the publication process. We decide if a paper is suitable for a journal and whether it should be sent for peer review. We invite peer reviewers for a paper. We facilitate the peer review process, evaluate reviews, and guide the revision process. We also handle appeals and facilitate transfers to other journals if the paper doesn't make it at our journal. And ideally, we take the paper all the way to acceptance. So let's talk about the first step of the editorial process. So once a paper is submitted, we have to decide as editors whether to send it for peer review or if it's better suited for another journal. And also I want to emphasize that at this stage, you don't need to worry about things like formatting or length. You can put your paper on bioRxiv or medRxiv. That's perfectly fine with us. And so at this early stage of the process, you don't need to worry about those things. So how do we, make these decisions, and what happens when your paper is submitted to Cell? So the first thing that happens when you submit a paper to Cell or any Cell Press journal is the first thing the editors are going to see is the abstract in the form of this thing we call the editorial pack, which is basically this massive spreadsheet that we get every day that has the abstract of every paper that's been submitted in the last 24 hours. And there's space for all of us editors to weigh in. So I've taken away the abstract and the title for anonymity, but this is kind of an example of what this looks like. So each of the editors can write little comments next to the abstract. They'll read it and make little comments. So they might say things like indicate if they're interested in handling the paper based on their expertise or similar papers they've handled or just general interest. They might write some initial thoughts or considerations that any handling editor should have. And sometimes if someone's recognized the paper or they had an email correspondence with an author or they know other pertinent information, they can put this here. And something we started doing recently is that this process is anonymized to the editor. So editors cannot see who the authors are for all of these papers. So we do this to try to be as unbiased as possible. Granted, we're only looking at the abstract, but this is the only stage where it's guaranteed that every single editor is going to see some part of your paper. So we think it's helpful to anonymize the authors so that we're not, potentially biased when we're making these kind of initial comments. So after this stage, the paper will be assigned to a single handling editor who will obviously read your entire paper, not just the abstract. But the handling editor will often go back to this editorial pack and they'll look at the comments that were made. And this is kind of helpful to think about, what questions should we be thinking about when we're reading the paper, and also get a sense of who we should be, what other editors we might want to involve in the process. Who else should we talk to? And so this is a good place to kind of figure out who I should include in the decision-making process of a paper that I'm handling. So after these the editors have commented on the anonymized spreadsheet, again, the paper is assigned to a handling editor. So editors specialize in certain topics. I mentioned that I handle kind of more like biotech, microbiology papers, but we discuss papers as a team. So we will talk with multiple different editors about the paper to help make these decisions. The handling editor will read your full paper and make a decision on whether the paper is suitable for peer review of the journal. And in order to make this decision, the handling editor needs to understand what you did and why it matters. At this step, and honestly at all steps of publishing work, it's very important that your work is clearly communicated so the editor can properly evaluate it. We're trying to put the work in context of the field, so it's important that it's very clear what questions you're trying to address in your paper. What has been done previously? What's previous similar literature, and how does your work compare? What are the main takeaways that you want a reader to come away from after reading your paper? What are the most important findings of your paper? And who is impacted by your findings? Something else that's important to have is benchmarking. So this is direct comparison of your findings or your method to existing methods or knowledge. And this is really important to provide a clear, direct picture of the advances that your work can provide. So using good, let's say, proof of principle examples or good comparisons is often the best way to clearly illustrate the benefits of your work. So you think about like, what are the biggest advantages or advances of my work, and then show that directly with examples. And this will not only help you at the initial editorial stage, but honestly, this will also help you in peer review. Because if it's not obvious what you did, how it compares to existing work and why it matters, reviewers are also less likely to understand your work, and they might judge it unfairly. So it's really important to clearly state your main findings and significance for the initial editorial evaluation, but also for reviewers as well, if your paper gets sent for peer review. So when an editor is reading your work, they're asking things like, are the experiments logically designed? Did you do if you're trying to answer a certain question, did you do the experiments that would actually allow you to address that question? Are the conclusions strongly supported by the data? And how does this paper advance the field? And this is something that all journals are going to look for. Specifically at Cell, we are looking for papers that are likely to really change the research landscape. So kind of bigger than usual advances. So we're looking for research that provides an unusually significant advance. It maybe drastically changes how we think about a fundamental part of the field. It addresses a major question, kind of a major bottleneck or a really pressing need that impacts a lot of people. So I know it might not be super clear what I mean when I say something like an unusually significant advance. So to try to illustrate this, so different journals are going to look for different degrees of advance. So let's say that where this person is right now here, this person represents kind of what is the status quo of knowledge and what the scientific community knows right now. And almost every research study is going to move that status quo forward, right? Because no matter how small a discovery may seem, you hopefully know more after your study. So when we get a paper, we ask, what do we learn from this paper? And what can we now achieve because of this paper? And where does that take the research community? So a lot of papers are going to move the field forward, maybe this much, this little yellow arrow here. And some other ones will move it forward this much. And then every now and then you get a paper that really changes what we know or what we can do as a research community. And that is what Cell specifically is looking for. We're looking for work that provides an unusually large increase in valuable knowledge or capabilities. But every journal is looking for a specific amount of advance. So a journal like Immunity or Cell Chemical Biology might look for a more intermediate amount of advance, maybe that middle arrow. middle yellow arrow there. Or a journal like Cell Reports might not need as big of an advance, and it's maybe looking for that smaller arrow there. So it's very dependent on the journal. It does kind of often correlate with the journal's impact factor, which can be how you can try to assess this. So again, at Cell specifically, how we're thinking about this kind of advance is it's not just, is this new or is this the first time anyone has done this? We're more concerned about how many people will be interested or impacted by these findings. And I think this is important because there are a lot of papers that are not necessarily highly cited, but contain very important work that affects a lot of people. So it's not always about impact factor, although that does, high impact factor papers sometimes also are ones that impact a lot of people or are very interesting, but we don't just kind of look for that. We're kind of just thinking about who is impacted by these things. We're asking things like, are you asking big questions, or kind of who is affected by these findings? So you're probably wondering how we decide if something is a significant enough advance. So we make these decisions primarily from our interactions with the research community. So we go to a lot of conferences and we see what topic areas are covered in conferences, what talks people are particularly excited about, what kinds of questions people are asking after the talks. We also meet with researchers at conferences and also when we visit institutes, and we see what people are working on. And we ask them, what type of research are you excited about? What are you not excited about? What are some of your favorite papers you've read recently? And by continuously engaging with the research community, we try to have our metrics as editors reflect the interests and needs of the global research community. We also, confer with other editors when we're handling papers who might have more expertise in certain areas, and we also rely on literature searches. It is also important to note that different research areas are going to have slightly different criteria for what is a significant advance. Not all research is at kind of the same level of kind of development or funding sometimes compared to others. So the bar can constantly change. And in order to understand where the bar is, we have to, again, continuously engage with the research community. I mentioned this at the very beginning, but we have multiple different types of papers. I mentioned that we have short form articles, which are about 4 figures. We publish, most of what we publish are kind of these more common research articles that describe some sort of new biological insight or advance. We also publish resource articles, which are more focused on advances in methods or tools. And they have concrete evidence of how the methodological advance can enable biological, clinical, or just generally new practical advances. And we also publish reviews, snapshots, and primers, kind of more opinion type pieces or summary articles as well. I want to talk very briefly about our resource type articles because I think that the criteria can be a bit less clear for these types of articles. So for resource articles, or kind of our more methods focused articles, one of the main things we're thinking about is how many people are going to be able to use or want to use this method, and what is the extent of new knowledge and capabilities it enabled. So you have a description of the method or database, and you have some sort of validation, right? But we, and also reviewers, are going to be looking for some direct demonstration that the method can be used to do something of general interest that was previously impossible to do. So if you have a tool or a resource data set or a new drug target, it's usually not enough for Cell specifically to just say that in the future, you could do all kinds of amazing things with it. Or in the future, you might be able to pull out all these different insights. We're looking for papers that are actually doing that. They're doing some sort of direct demonstration that this method can be used to pull out new insights, so discover superior drug candidates or otherwise do things that were not possible. We're looking for strong evidence that this resource or method can actually move the field or fields forward a lot, like very, very strong evidence of that, something that would be very convincing to a reader. And I also want to emphasize that making a widely used process or technique far cheaper or more accessible is also considered a major advance. So, any tool or data set that's drastically advancing our current capabilities or knowledge is what we're looking for here. Okay, so I've talked a lot about how editors make initial decisions, but what about if your paper is sent for peer review? Then what decisions are we making there? So, how we select reviewers, we will draw from suggested reviewers sometimes. So, these are actually very helpful for us. If you would like to suggest reviewers, that's very helpful. We won't exclusively draw from them though, because we don't, sometimes people might only suggest their friends, and we don't want a non-rigorous review process. So, we might take a few suggested reviewers, but we won't usually ask only suggested reviewers. You can also, when you submit a paper, you can write a list of people that you absolutely do not want to review your paper. This might be because they're working on something similar. They might be competitors, or people that just maybe you think might be biased in evaluating your work. So we will always honor those requests for excluded reviewers. Not all the reviewers are going to have the same expertise, especially for cell papers. They're often very big papers. They might be very interdisciplinary. So we might need reviewers that come from different angles and cover all the different relevant parts of the paper. We usually have about 3 reviewers, but it can vary. We might only need 2, we might need 4, depends on the paper. We also are looking, specifically at Cell, we're looking to try to improve the diversity of our reviewers and kind of expand our reviewer pool. This is for a few reasons. I guess one reason is at all journals, there's been some literature on this, but the majority of people who are asked to review come from the US and kind of Western Europe. And of course, that's not where global research comes from. Research comes from all over the place. And so there tends to be more of a disproportionate burden on researchers in the US and kind of Western Europe for reviewing. And so we're trying to kind of shift that burden off and try to ask people from all over the world to review more. All the many highly qualified people from all over the world who can review. But also it's important to include more people in the review process because reviewers are instrumental in deciding whether or not a paper is published in Cell or not, and what is necessary to get it published in Cell. And it's important to try to include as many people in that decision-making process because you don't want just researchers from a few countries deciding what is very impactful research. So we're trying to expand our reviewer pool in that sense. What we ask from reviewers is, at least you hope that they have an understanding of the paper. We want the reviewers to kind of assess how well the data is supporting the conclusions and give kind of an assessment of technical quality. We're also looking for reviewers to provide some sort of assessment of how this work compares to existing work, how much of an advance it provides, how much is these new findings, or how much is this method likely to change current knowledge or capabilities. And we're also looking for feedback on who is impacted by this work. This is something that editors can kind of assess, but I think reviewers also are very well poised to assess, how many people are going to be interested in these types of findings, and will people in other fields or adjacent fields also be impacted by this work. And ultimately, the editor, not the reviewers, though, is the one that's responsible for making the final decision after all the reviews have come in. So as an editor, I don't just count votes. So I don't say like, oh, the majority of reviewers like this paper, therefore we're going to invite a revision. I'm considering what the concerns were that each reviewer has. Sometimes I can overrule reviewers. Either very positive reviewers or very negative reviewers. And I try to use my judgment as to what reviewer requests are feasible. I know this is kind of a common issue, is that especially I think at high tier journals like Cell, reviewers can often ask for a lot of work. And to the best of my judgment, I try to assess whether or not some of these requests are reasonable or not. Of course, we will miss things sometimes, I know, as an editor. And so we try to also discuss with other reviewers. So sometimes when all the reviews are in, I will send either like a very negative or a very positive review to the other reviewers, and I'll ask them to assess the fairness of some of the reviewer requests. And I also can discuss with authors as well. In some cases, I rely on authors to kind of let me know if there are certain requests that would take them years to do or would be very, very expensive and difficult. So we try as best we can to assess whether or not the reviewers are asking for things that are reasonable and fair. So if your paper is rejected at any stage of the submission process, there's always the option to appeal a decision through a rebuttal. Now, you should not always repeal your rejections, but I think that if you think the editor or the reviewer's concerns can be addressed, it might be a good idea. So reasons when you should appeal are, let's say that the editor or reviewer is saying, we're rejecting this because they don't have X data. But during the process, you have that data actually. So if you can actually provide data that is a reason for rejection, that might be a reason to appeal. Or if there are very unfeasible requests or factual errors and things that the editor or the reviewer said. You don't necessarily want to appeal when there's kind of subjective disagreements about novelty and significance. I know that this can be kind of frustrating because I think that a lot of how we evaluate research is somewhat subjective. It's just that these arguments sometimes are not, or disagreements are not always very likely to be resolved. So it's usually best not to appeal also if there's very extensive concerns or kind of fundamental concerns that reviewers or editors have on the paper. You also almost always have the option to transfer to another journal within Cell Press. So you can transfer papers whether or not they've been peer reviewed. So at any stage if it's rejected at any stage. We do have a dedicated transfer team that I think is very useful, and their email is up here. And you can consult them if your paper is rejected and you're not quite sure where to go next. And the editors at this transfer team, they will confer with editors at, many different relevant journals, and they'll try to help you get some information as to what journals might be interested. So this can kind of save you time sometimes. If you choose to transfer, so almost always you'll have this option where in the rejection letter, there will be a link where you can agree to transfer. If you click on that, there is going to be a list of options for journals you can transfer to that the editor has selected. If you agree to transfer, you have the option of uploading new documents. You can, for example, upload responses to reviewers. You can upload a new cover letter. You can even upload a new manuscript if there's been revisions, and then it will go to this new journal. Also, if you want a completely fresh start, like maybe you went through a review process and you were really frustrated with the reviewers and you don't want that to follow you to the new journal, you can just submit as a new document to another journal, and you can have kind of a fresh start that way. Another thing that we've started over the last few years, which I think is really nice, is this thing called the Cell multi-journal submission. So this is basically an option where you can have your paper considered simultaneously at multiple Cell Press journals. So I remember from publishing my own research that oftentimes I'll submit to a journal, they reject me. And I go to another journal and maybe it'll go for review and then I'll get rejected. And I kind of would bounce between journals and it just takes so long, and it's kind of like it's a bit of a demoralizing process. And so the goal with this initiative is that instead of having to bounce between journals, you can kind of choose a bunch of different journals that you think that of maybe multiple different impact factors that you think might be options for your journal. And then you can have your paper considered at all of them at the same time. So basically how this works is, let's say you have a paper and you want to have it considered by Cell, Cancer Cell, Immunity, and Cell Reports. So a write-up of your paper will go to an editor at each of these journals, and they'll be asked, do you want to review this paper? So then they'll give some feedback that says, let's say Cell says, no, I don't think we want to review this, and these are the reasons. And the other journals might say, yes, we would like to review this. So you'll get a decision letter saying your paper is going off for review at Cancer Cell, Immunity, and Cell Reports methods. So the paper will go off for review, and reviewers will evaluate it for those journals. And then after that, the reviews will go to these journals. Cancer Cell, Immunity, Cell Report sees them. Maybe Cancer Cell says, oh, after looking at these reviews, I don't think we want to proceed for these reasons, but maybe the other two journals are open to proceeding. So then you can do a revision that goes to Immunity and Cell Reports. And then after doing a revision, maybe Immunity looks at the revision and says, I don't know if we can proceed with it, but Cell Reports Method says we'll accept. So at the end of this, your paper has gone through maybe 1 or 2 rounds of peer review, and you have a place to put your paper, as opposed to the time it would have taken to go to each of these journals individually and kind of maybe have to go through a few revision processes and rejections. So a little bit about what I do kind of in a typical day. I'm usually reading new papers, selecting reviewers, evaluating revised papers that have gone through review and we've invited a revision, making decisions, at all these stages. I'm evaluating appeals to decisions. I'm having calls with authors or reviewers. I attend some meetings discussing papers that I have with other editors or helping other editors with their papers. I also sometimes commission review articles or opinion pieces, and I'm doing final checks on papers that are about to go off for acceptance. And some of the things that I do, other than just reading papers and inviting reviewers, is I have the opportunity to think about how we can change the publishing process for the better. Editors don't have, I think, ultimate power over the for-profit publishing system, but we do have some power to change some things. So, there have been some discussions recently about things like double anonymous peer review. How do we improve research integrity and reproducibility? Is there some changes in our policies we can make? That multi-journal submission I talked about, that was something that came out of editorial discussions. We're also working with editors at other journals, other Cell Press journals, to talk about topics and discuss transfers. And we're also connecting with the global research community by attending conferences, lab visits, and local seminars. And we even can organize conferences ourselves. So speaking of conferences, we travel a lot, mainly because the research and the topics we publish should be reflective of the interests and needs of the global research community. So we will travel all over the world and try to engage with researchers, trying to listen and learn and understand the experiences of researchers, problems that they have, and try to engage with communities and think of ways that we can help. And then also as an editor at a high profile journal, I think I have the responsibility to use my platform to try to make research more equitable. We at Cell say that we're a global research journal. And so our goal is to highlight the research and also the ideas and perspectives of researchers all over the world. Now, in practice, I know that we have some work to do. But something we can do as editors is try to intentionally elevate understudied or undervalued research topics, or highlight the voices of researchers that have historically not been given much of a voice. And we also aim to diversify who is involved in this evaluation of research and this decision-making process of what research gets published in high-impact journals. So since 2020, we have had this goal that 1/3 of all of our reviewers have to be female, and 1/3 of all of our reviewers have to come from countries outside the US and the UK. And we met this goal, I think, by a lot since 2020. We also try to diversify our advisory board, to make sure it's half female and tries to reflect the diversity of the global research community. We also try to travel widely, interact with global researchers who can inform how we evaluate papers. But as you can maybe see from the map on the lower left, which is kind of where we traveled last year, we could travel a bit more broadly. So we definitely have, a lot of work to do, I think, as editors to try to address some of the inequities in scientific publishing and who is represented and who is involved in the process. So I know that open access might be a topic of general interest, so I want to talk about that a little bit. So Cell Press has both fully open access and kind of these hybrid journals. So open access at Cell Press is gold open access, which means that you pay an article publishing fee to cover costs of publishing, and then the article is immediately open access. So this is how it works at journals like, let's say, Cell Reports, that's fully open access. Cell is a hybrid journal, and there's several Cell Press journals that are hybrid where you can choose. So you can either pay the article publishing charge for immediate open access, or you can pay no charge. It's completely free, and the paper is subscription only for 1 year, and then it becomes open access. So this is actually something that I didn't realize until I came to work here, was that all Cell Press papers, if they're not open access, they become freely accessible to anyone after 12 months. We also do open access for certain topics that are potentially very important to get out quickly to the global community. So we did this during the Ebola pandemic back in 2016, I think that was, and also during COVID recently, and more recently, you guys have probably been hearing about how there's, I guess, increased concern over mpox or monkeypox. And so some of our recent work in that has been given kind of free open access because of that. Also, all papers or all authors are going to get something called a share link if you publish in Cell. So this is a link that is sent to you and all of your co-authors, and you can use this link. You can send it to your friends, you can send it to your colleagues, and it will give them free access to your article for 50 days. So this is a good way to kind of share your work if it's not open access. And we also have agreements with a lot of funding groups, and also like with countries and institutes and stuff, to kind of help researchers comply with open access policies. So let's say that you're funded by institutions that require that you publish open access. We try to have agreements with a good number of countries and funding bodies to help figure out how those fees can be reimbursed to you. So everything that I've talked about today, I think most of it, is also on this kind of blog that we have called Cell Mentor. So Cell Mentor, I think, is actually a pretty valuable resource because there's a bunch of articles there about different things about the publication process, but there's also resources there for like how to mentorship for science writing, how to write a good abstract, how to write a good scientific paper. There's also little tutorials too on certain, common techniques that you can access. So I would recommend checking this out if you're interested. So yeah, if you have, a paper or, a project that you're working on, or even just some initial ideas that you're interested in thinking about publication options, you're always welcome to email an editor or kind of the general inbox. This is the email for Cell's general inbox. You're always welcome to ask for a call. I can't necessarily guarantee that it will be honored, but we are open to having direct calls with authors to discuss papers. And if you're having a phone call or a Zoom call, it's often good to have kind of the lead authors or trainees present to ask questions and learn about the process. Pre-submission inquiries are always welcome. I will say at Cell that if it's a bit borderline, we'll usually just tell you to go ahead and submit. But you're always welcome to send an email asking about whether a paper is suitable for Cell. If you already have the paper written up, it's often best, I think, just to go ahead and submit it and see how it goes. And again, formatting and length does not matter at submission, so you don't have to worry about those things. And with that, that's my presentation, and I'm happy to take any questions that you have.